Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here this evening and for joining us for Turtles, Frogs, and Birds Protecting the Wildlife of Illinois Wetlands. We are going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us for this event. I'm really excited about the panel that we have joining us today, and all that we're going to cover, talking about the wildlife of Illinois wetlands, and how we can protect these spaces and these species. My name is Emily Kowalski. I am the Outreach and Engagement Manager with Environment Illinois, a policy and action group with one mission: to build a greener, healthier world. Today we are hosting this event with the Protect Illinois Waters Coalition, a coalition of environmental and community organizations from across Illinois working to protect our wetlands. And I'm joined today by a panel of experts: Dr. Melissa Youngquist, a research biologist with Shedd Aquarium, and Stephanie Bilke, Senior Manager of Conservation Science at Audubon Great Lakes. I want to thank them both so much for being here tonight. But just to get us started, wetlands provide critical habitat for turtles, frogs, birds, other amazing wildlife. They help to support our state and our region's rich biodiversity. And so I'm so excited to hear the presentations from our experts tonight. And we will have some time at the end for a short Q&A. So if you have questions for our panelists, please submit those using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. First, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Melissa Youngquist, who is a member of the freshwater research team at Shedd Aquarium's Daniel P. Herther Center for Conservation Research. Her research focuses on how invasive species affect terrestrial and aquatic habitats used by amphibians. Thanks so much again for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Let me share my screen. Excellent. So I want to spend today talking about the animals that we're looking to protect, the many species who rely on wetland habitats for some or all of their life cycle. And so to take a step back, if my slides will advance, there we go. So I am here on behalf of Shedd, and so thank you for inviting me to come. Shedd is, the aquarium here in Chicago, and we're working really hard to do conservation at the aquarium around Chicago region, as well as globally. And we do this sort of through three main avenues. The first is conservation research, which is what I'm a part of. Conservation action, where we take action on the ground and get the community engaged in activities, as well as through policy and advocacy. My particular research is looking at how restoration done by our partners, such as the Park District and the forest preserves, as well as volunteers with Shedd, is benefiting wetland habitats and the amphibians and insects and other animals that use these. Today I want to talk mostly about ephemeral wetlands. These are also temporary wetlands because these are the habitats that have lost protections with the recent Supreme Court ruling. They tend to not be connected to other habitats terrestrially, and so they're kind of just in the woods or in the prairies, and you may not notice them until you stumble upon them. And because they're temporary or ephemeral, they go through these cycles of being wet and dry. And so here we can see the four seasons. They're the wettest in the spring when they refill. Through the summer, they flourish with all the plant life. And then in the fall, they dry up. And in the winter, depending on whether you're a little bit more northern, a little bit southern, they may be wet or they may be frozen. So I just kind of want to walk you through the community and the animals that use these habitats. Some of these are relying only on ephemeral habitats, and some use both ephemeral as well as permanent ponds. So like I said, in the fall and winter, these habitats are usually either frozen or dry, and they're not dead though. They're full of life. Many insect species like dragonflies and caddisflies and damselflies, as well as some crustaceans like berry shrimp, have their eggs in a dormant stage, just resting on the bottom, waiting for the spring rains. And other species like some copepods and zooplankton, as well as fingernail clams, will burrow down to the sediment and just kind of hang out until the ponds are wet once more. I want to highlight a couple species that are active during the fall. The first is a marbled salamander, and this is one of 20 salamanders found in Illinois. 17 of our salamanders require wet habitats for their life cycle. Marbled salamanders are unique because they lay their eggs terrestrially, sort of in the dry basin of a pond in the fall. And then with the winter rains, that's when the eggs hatch out and then they metamorphose in the spring. Most salamanders are coming to the pond in the spring and laying eggs aquatically, whereas these salamanders are laying their eggs when the pond is dry. And so I think this is just a really cool adaptation of these animals that is very unique to our amphibians. And another really cool animal is our painted turtle. These are one of the most common turtles that we have really in the East, especially in Illinois. They're very dramatically colored. They've got bright red shell on the underneath, these beautiful yellow stripes. And similar to all other turtle species, the mothers lay eggs. They dig sort of nests in the ground. They lay the eggs and the eggs hatch out in the fall. Painted turtles are kind of special because when the eggs hatch in the fall, the young have a choice whether to leave the nest and go sort of live on the land for a while and then go to sort of a larger lake to overwinter to hide from the ice. And that's what most turtles do. But painted turtles, these neonates, these little hatchlings, are able to sort of super cool themselves. And so many times they're actually going to spend the winter inside their nests and survive the freezing temperatures. And then in the spring will emerge as little hatchlings. So we just have some really cool adaptations with our turtles here. So Illinois has 17 turtle species and 15 of those are reliant on wetland habitats. And so now that brings us to spring, which is right now. This is the most exciting time of the year for me working out in the wetlands. This is when we get our spring emergences and migrations. Species like spotted salamanders and blue spotteds, which are up at the top there, as well as wood frogs. This is when they are all congregating to wetlands in the early spring, just as things melt. And these adults might only be at the wetland for like a week while they breed and lay eggs. We've got our little neonate painted turtles are coming out. Yeah, snappers are starting to emerge, as well as species like chorus frogs, which might hang out in the wetland for 2 or 3 months, have a much longer and extended breeding period. And this is where all the new life happens. So there's just these wetlands are teeming with new eggs from our salamanders and our frogs. Insects are coming out. The eggs that were laid the previous year are hatching out. So we have a picture of a damselfly larva on the top and a caddisfly larva on the bottom. Salamanders are coming out. And so really right now it's like the most exciting time. These wetlands are just bursting forth with new life. And one species to highlight is our American toad. Again, one of the most common species. And I feel like so many times the rare species get a lot of attention, but we need to remember to keep our common species common and to appreciate them for who they are. Toads are one of my favorite. They're just so dynamic and so adaptable. They thrive in urban environments and ex-urban environments, in agricultural lands and forests and pristine areas. They're just so adaptable. These are explosive breeders, and so at any given wetland, they're coming out to call and lay eggs for maybe about a week, and there may be a few bouts at a single wetland throughout the season. So they're actually active for 2 or 3 months, but they're only at one wetland for a few days. And toads have been showing to be pretty adaptable to climate change. So the last few years, we've had very dry springs, and we found that the toads have sort of delayed their breeding until summer rains have sort of refilled wetlands in July. And so there's a lot of hope for these species, but they are reliant on these temporary wetlands for their reproduction. So this is just one of the 22 frogs that we have in Illinois, and all of them require some kind of aquatic habitat. Many of them, these fishless ephemeral wetlands. And since we're talking about turtles here, I want to highlight the Blandings turtle, sort of as a surrogate for the many turtles in Illinois that are conservation concern. We have 8 species that are threatened or endangered. I think 6 of them are aquatic. And so Blandings turtles are these gorgeous, they've got these bright yellow chins. They like to hang out in sort of shallow, open wetlands with lots of vegetation to hide in. They move around a lot, and so they may require multiple wetlands all within a single landscape for their sort of summer habitat. And reasons for the decline is that there's a lot of nest predation by things like raccoons, a lot of habitat loss. So a lot of these sort of wetlands, open canopy wetlands have been filled in. There's lots of mortality on the road because these animals move around a lot. And so there's a lot of roadkill. And then there's, unfortunately poaching and collections for these animals. And like most turtles, Blandings turtles don't sort of reach reproductive maturity until they're about 20 years old. And so it takes a long time for population to recover from any loss. And they really need a lot of help from us. The shed is involved with other partners to do head starting. And so we collect eggs, hatch them out, and make sure those youngsters have a really good start on life. And so that brings us to the end of summer. This is when all our animals, our amphibians, are starting to metamorphose, as well as our insects. The pond is drying up and they hop away. These little tiny ones on my finger are peepers and chorus frogs. Tree frogs are leaving toads. Bullfrogs will sometimes overwinter as tadpoles, and sometimes it'll metamorphose on a single season. That's a tiny bullfrog on the bottom right corner. And up top, we have our northern leopard frog. And everything is flying away. And so our damselflies and dragonflies, caddisflies, and midges are all leaving the wetland and possibly being eaten by all our birds. And so Stephanie, following after me, will talk more about the birds in our wetlands. So I thought that'd be a good transition because it's all a huge sort of food web cycle. Everything is feeding everything. And these wetlands are really important as habitat for our species, as well as providing nutrients for everything else. So I just want to leave you with the message that these are just really dynamic systems. They are biodiversity hotspots, and there are so many different animals that rely on these wetlands each year for their own life cycles, as well as all the animals around them that use these habitats in one way or another. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love seeing all the photos of the different wetland critters. Always so interesting to hear more about the different adaptations that these species have. So thank you so much for sharing. Next, I want to hand it over to Stephanie Bilke, the Senior Manager of Conservation Science at Audubon Great Lakes. Since joining Audubon in 2017, Stephanie has, followed her passion by leading marsh bird monitoring projects to inform coastal wetland restoration across the Great Lakes states while engaging community scientists and Audubon chapters. And I want to just thank you so much for being here, Stephanie. I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Emily. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Well, thanks again. And thank you, Melissa, for transitioning us to thinking about birds. And I'm in a similar position in that, when we're thinking about birds and wetlands, we're thinking about all creatures, because birds wouldn't be there if there weren't the delicious insects, fish, and frogs to eat. So I'm going to be talking about Audubon Great Lakes to work to conserve wetlands, to preserve our precious birds, and also benefit people as well. So first, I'm just going to introduce you to our office. If you're not familiar, Audubon Great Lakes is our regional office of the National Audubon Society, and our mission is to protect critical habitat for birds and people through conservation, as well as community engagement, supporting our chapter network across the continent, and as well as our environmental advocacy work. And I am based in Chicago, but we have teams of people working across the Great Lakes on the US side. And in 2021, we actually released our vision plan for the Great Lakes that described how we were going to work to improve habitat for birds and people within 12 priority coastal wetland areas on the US side of the Great Lakes. And so you can see those circled areas are all of our priority regions, and we have projects going on in each one of those areas. But if you look on the map towards that circle in Illinois and Indiana, that's where we're going to be focusing more today, is that Calumet region. And of course, I probably don't have to, if you're here, you already probably care about wetlands, but I have to ask the question, why do we care about wetlands? Why is that such a big focus of our work? Well, so many folks here today, and myself personally, we all, might believe already that wetlands have intrinsic value, as well as all the creatures that live there, but they also have really important benefits, providing habitat for birds, fish, and other wildlife that depend on wetlands for their survival. And a lot of other animals, just like the frogs that Melissa, and turtles, and that Melissa was talking about, their life cycle really depends on these wetlands being here, and that's the same for a lot of these birds. In addition, wetlands can hold approximately 1 million gallons of water per acre and reduce flooding. And in addition, wetlands clean our water and store carbon from being released into the atmosphere. So, just advancing my slide here. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be focusing on the Calumet. It's a really incredibly rich and diverse area in along the south side of Chicago, and it extends through northwest Indiana all the way to southwest Michigan. And the reason why we are so focused on the Calumet area is that it has incredible historic importance for birds of many different kinds, and that's because of all the wetlands that are present here. And it has been known going back centuries that this has been an important area for marsh nesting birds, as well as a major congregating area for waterfowl during the winter and their migration, as well as important habitat for other water birds like herons and cormorants and all kinds of bird species. And right now, during this early spring season that we're in right now, we're starting to see a lot of waterfowl or ducks and geese moving through. And if you go to any one of these wetlands in the Calumet region, you might see up to a dozen species of duck species that are all on their way to their northern breeding grounds. So it's a really special place. And along with that, I'm going to introduce you to some of our key marsh bird species that we are focused on in the Calumet and beyond. These are what we call our focal species for our Audubon Great Lakes Marsh Bird Conservation Program. And some of them include species like herons, like the American bittern and least bittern, and rails such as the Virginia rail and sora, which are probably, to some of you, you may have never heard of these birds before. And that's because we actually call them secretive marsh birds, and they're so secretive that they spend most of their lives really hidden within the reeds, hiding in dense vegetation. So oftentimes we hear them more often than we see them. And they spend a lot of their lives hidden away, but that's just a more reason to figure out what's going on with them, because they're so secretive. In addition, other kinds of birds use marsh wetlands, like the black tern. This is actually a species that disappeared from the Calumet region not long ago, but used to regularly breed here. Common gallinule, which is another rail species. So this is a species that looks a little bit like a duck, but isn't a duck, and spends its whole life in marshes. The blue-winged teal and other duck species, this is one duck that nests and breeds in the Calumet area and can be found all summer long. And then the pied-bill grebe, which is a tiny diving water bird that has a booming voice, one of our favorites. So sadly, a lot of these species have been declining in the Great Lakes region, and up to finding up to a 60% decline in some of these species, like the black tern, which, like I said, was extirpated or disappeared from the Calumet region in the last few decades. But this was a population trends that were published by Birds Canada through their marsh monitoring program, showing these very steep declines for many of the common marsh breeding species in the Great Lakes. And it's pretty startling to see even species that we think of as common are declining pretty drastically in a 20-year period. So why are marsh birds declining, or why have they declined in Illinois and other areas of the Great Lakes? Well, a big part of that is the loss of habitat, and of the habitat that we have remaining that's appropriate for these birds, we've seen loss of habitat quality for reasons such as invasive species, contaminants, changes to how our water bodies are connected to each other, and all of these issues are exacerbated by climate change. So you can see if you've driven along the expressway between Chicago and Indiana, you're probably familiar with this scene, but you may not know that you're passing over these large water bodies or ghosts of large water bodies that used to be here. So I like to show this map of what Lake Calumet and its neighboring lakes used to look like and how they were connected to Lake Michigan. But that scene has been drastically changed due to industry and urbanization in the Chicago area. So that's just illustrating, what has happened to a lot of our wetlands, in the last few centuries. And we still do have high quality wetlands in Illinois. This picture was taken in Illinois, actually, but this is really just a picture of what we love to see in our wetlands, just this diverse habitat, what we call habitat structure, where there's different layers of open water and plant life, plants that are emerging from the water like cattails and floating vegetation, providing lots of different resources for birds to forage and to nest. And this area is probably chock full of marsh birds that you might not even be able to see, but they're there. But this is what we're often seeing instead in areas like Calumet, is invasive common reed or phragmites, which kind of takes over a wetland, and you lose that special structure that you once had. Alternatively, you might see wetlands that are just all open water without that nice intermixing of vegetation, and that also doesn't provide the right kind of habitat that a lot of marsh nesting birds need. So what can we do to help wetland birds? Of course, of utmost important, protect our existing wetlands, keep them protected, manage those wetlands to be healthy and diverse to meet birds' diverse needs, and ensure that conservation actions that are happening to protect these wetlands are also informed by the birds themselves. And what do I mean by that? Well, birds can actually tell us the health of a wetland by being present. And they're actually, in comparison to other groups of living things, they are relatively easy to detect. So we call them environmental indicators because a lot of birds are sensitive to habitat condition, like water levels, the types of vegetation available, and they use different parts of the wetland depending on the species. So they can reflect a variety of what I call subhabitats within the wetland. And they're easy to detect. Even though I said that they're secretive, they make sounds and we can hear them and detect them by their sound. And I think I forgot to share with audio, so I'm going to reshare really quick so I can play you the sound of the sora in the picture here. So that fun sound is what we listen for when we go out to these wetlands to see if these birds are present. Oops. So like I alluded to, Audubon Great Lakes runs a monitoring program where we're going out and determining if these birds are present. We deploy community scientists both in Northeast Illinois and Northwest Indiana at over 30 wetland sites, engaging over 30 monitors through community science every year. And this information that folks are gathering is really critical to our conservation efforts. And just a note about how that monitoring exists, or how it works, is that our volunteers go out at the crack of dawn. So that's about 5 a.m. 3 times a year in the early spring to see if these birds are using these different wetland sites across Illinois and Indiana. And we've been doing this monitoring since 2015, so we've been able to collect a really great amount of data. One case that I love to show is that at Big Marsh, we started surveying for marsh birds in 2015. And this was just at the early stages of when the park district acquired the site. And in those first 2 years, we only found 2 of our 17 marsh bird species. And then after a lot of work was done to restore the site and provide more vegetation growth for birds and eliminate some invasive species, we had a peak of 11 species in 2018 out of our 17 that were just detected on the surveys. And that has that trend has pretty much continued since then because of thanks largely to the commitment of the park district to restore the natural area in the marsh. And this is just what it looked like before and after in 2015 and 2017. So you see they had really a lot of this exposed open water, not a lot of plant life. And they did a drawdown and then also did an herbicide of invasive Phragmites. And after that, they got this lush growth of a lot of cattail, but other kinds of plant species as well. And that provided the habitat that birds needed in order to thrive at Big Marsh, including a couple of species like common gallinule and least bittern, which are on the state endangered threatened list in Illinois. So as I mentioned, we've been collecting a lot of data, and we welcome you all to take a look at that data. It's shared through our Marsh Bird Data Hub, and you can click through all of our different sites where we have monitors and see how birds have been doing at those different sites through the years, going back to 2017. And then our most recent data from last year is out there as well. So the little green dots in the map are just showing the different sites that we have data from. And quickly, I just want to share one of our other exciting projects that we're I'm really looking forward to being able to get some data after some major work has been happening. And this is at Powderhorn Lake, which is not too far away from Big Marsh, which I was sharing about earlier. And the work was to reconnect Powderhorn Lake to Wolf Lake, which then connects to Lake Michigan. And this allows for water levels to fluctuate more because formerly it was isolated and the water didn't have anywhere to go. It was pooling out into the roads. And now that it'll be connected, it also provides passage for fish moving back and forth between Wolf Lake, a safe area for them to spawn, and of course, more food for our birds, and healthier habitat. We're hoping that it'll attract more of our secretive marsh birds, and we'll be able to find out when we return to do surveys this year after this major project has been completed. So in conclusion, I just want to share some takeaways in that birds can tell us how to manage wetlands for wildlife by doing monitoring. We can find out, how they're responding and then give that information back to land managers and to share that with our communities as well to show just how important these sites are. And just what's really exciting that has come out of all this work is that marsh birds can respond really quickly to management, even within a few years. And they can really thrive, even, species of conservation concern in these urban wetlands, which is really great news. And of course, protecting and conserving wetlands is critical, not just for birds, but for people too. So thank you, and I'll hand it back to Emily.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. It's so interesting to look at the data and to hear the stories about, the restoration and how we're seeing that work, and also just how interconnected all of the elements of our ecosystem are. Before we go to questions from our audience, I did want to share with everyone a couple of ways that you all can get involved in helping to protect wetlands here in Illinois. We just heard a lot about different species and how important wetlands are as habitat for wildlife. And as Stephanie mentioned, they also, help to protect clean water, filtering pollutants, and protecting the clean water of our larger rivers and lakes. And they also are critical to helping mitigate flooding. In short, wetlands are essential parts of a healthy environment here in Illinois for wildlife and for us. And Illinois has already lost over 90% of its wetlands. Human activity, pollution, degradation threaten our wetlands, and it's time for us as a state to protect them. The Illinois legislature is actually currently considering a bill that would do just that, but our lawmakers need to hear from folks like all of you who are joining us today, that we need them to take action now. So I'm gonna share a quick slide that has two ways that you can help protect Illinois wetlands. On the left, there's a QR code to send a message to your legislators asking them to support the Wetlands Protection Act. I'll also put the link in the chat so that if you are on a computer and want to just grab that link, you can take action that way. But we also need more than just the folks in the room tonight to ask for wetlands protections. So we are doing what we're calling a photo blitz, asking everyone to, look at their past photos when they might have visited a wetland, or go out to a wetland this weekend or anytime between now and Earth Day, snap a picture and share it on social media using the hashtag #ProtectIsleWaters. That will help to bring more awareness of the important role that wetlands play in our environment. And we hope when you share it, you share some of the information that you learned today with your friends and family. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and we'll move on to some questions. Let me make it so that we're all visible. And I wanted to start with one question, which I was interested in, which is just how did each of you come to this point where you are doing work around wetlands? What brought you to this line of work? And I don't know who'd like to go first.
I can take that. I think mine is a pretty typical story of many biologists who are working out in the field. Is that as a kid, I spent my days tromping around creeks catching tadpoles. And so, you know, when I was 7 years old, I just loved catching frogs and exploring nature. And so that as I went through school, I decided I really loved biology. I really loved science. I really loved being outside asking questions. And that I also really cared about having impactful science, right? Like something that could be applied. And conservation seemed to fit that realm where the research you do doesn't just like stay in the fancy, you know, ivory tower of science, but you can have real impact for people and for wildlife. And so that's where I decided to try and go. And that's where I was fortunate enough to end up.
Awesome.
Yeah, my story is very similar to Melissa's. Actually, I fell in love with birds when I was a kid, and I didn't necessarily have access to a lot of like beautiful natural areas outside my door, and I just fell in love with songbirds in my backyard. But that led me to inevitably or later being in grad school, and my advisor was actually leading a wetland bird monitoring project, and I got involved in that. And I didn't necessarily think that I would be a wetland bird biologist, but I kind of just fell into it. And I mean, I love all birds, so I don't I don't discriminate, but there is something special about being in a wetland at dawn and hearing all these different sounds and getting a sneak peek at species that, you know, are pretty difficult to see. So that's how I came into wetland birds, but also very similar to Melissa in the applied conservation side. I really wanted to be able to make a difference too.
Awesome. Well, we've got a question from Sam, which is, you know, what would be the biggest policy change that you would like to see to preserve our wetlands at a local and national level?
Yeah, I think the biggest disservice to the United States was the decision that wetlands and streams that don't hold water all the time and that are not connected to other big lakes and rivers do not impact our water quality and therefore are not protected under the Clean Water Act. And as Stephanie was saying, these sort of ephemeral wetlands, these small streams, actually can hold a lot of water. And they're really important for controlling flooding and for filtering our water to make it clean and protecting our large rivers and our lakes. And so even if they don't appear connected all the time, they are connected underground. And so I think finding a way to protect these smaller wetlands and smaller creeks would be the biggest legislative impact that we can have.
Great. Stephanie, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I 100% agree with everything Melissa said. And I'll just also add that we're trying to continue seeing that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding is funded at least at the level that it has been, if not more. We keep wanting to see that increase because that really is funding a lot of the important work that's helping to make sure that our wetlands stay or are enhanced to be high quality and protected and providing important habitat for wildlife.
Great. Seema in the Q&A asked specifically about Senate Bill 771, which is the Wetlands Protection Act. That bill is the bill that's being considered by the state legislature that would set up a program to ensure that we are protecting our wetlands from pollution and degradation, that actually sets up a system that if a wetland is going to be developed or otherwise changed and altered in a way that makes it so that that wetland is not able to provide the ecological benefits that wetlands do, that there is a way to actually mitigate that, create new wetland areas, etc. And so that is the bill that Environment Illinois and the Protect Illinois Waters Coalition is currently supporting. We have a question from Laura about dragonflies and damselflies. So Dr. Youngquist, I don't know if you want to speak to their presence as an indicator of clean water.
That is a fantastic question. And I will tell you, as every scientist starts to answer, is that it depends. And so when we're talking about ephemeral wetlands, they're very dynamic. So they're filling, they're drying, the water levels may get warmer, the oxygen may go down. And so in general, the dragonflies, damselflies in temporary wetlands are sort of tolerant to those changing conditions. There are a few examples where they may be more sensitive, but when we look at dragonflies and damselflies that use stream habitats, they are indicators of really good habitat quality, and especially relying on those sort of ephemeral streams as well. Those damselflies, things like the Heinz emerald dragonfly is one of our threatened species here, and they'd be an indicator of really high quality habitat.
Great, thank you. Well, I feel like one thing that is common is that a lot of people in the public actually don't understand what a wetland is. So if there was one thing that you feel like is a misconception about wetlands in the general public, what would you want to kind of dispel that misconception about wetland habitat with members of the general public?
I guess I would say that sometimes I feel like wetlands get a bad reputation, and you think of a wetland as, you know, full of mosquitoes and just like somewhere you wouldn't want to be, somewhere that you would get stuck in. But I just, you know, would reiterate all the benefits that wetlands provide. And if you go around draining our wetlands, the water will still be there, but it's just going to end up, you know, on our roads, in our basements, instead of in a natural area providing resources for wildlife and recreation and all kinds of things.
Great.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think often people have one image of like a wetlands, like a pond. Maybe it's a fish pond, or maybe it's a small pool. But wetlands encompass every type of body of water that grows plants. And so they can hold water year round. They can dry up after 2 weeks. They can be, you know, 5 meters squared, like they can be the size of a football field. And so I think that there's so much diversity, right? They can have trees, there can be no trees, could be all grasses. And so the plethora of different types of wetlands, I think, is what people often don't realize.
Great. Well, the question that I want to close with is just what advice do you have for all of us who want to learn more about wetlands and continue to help protect them?
Well, if you're really interested in seeing marsh birds firsthand and don't mind getting up early, you can learn more about our marsh bird monitoring program through Audubon Great Lakes and even volunteer. We're actually starting our monitoring season on May 1st. So the link that I shared in the chat to our marsh bird hub will give you more information on that. And you can also sign up for Audubon Great Lakes newsletters to learn about how you can support policies that help wetlands and continue following, you know, our work in the Calumet area and beyond.
Yeah, and I would say go out to your nearest forest preserve or park or state park, and just go hang out by a wetland. If you just take that time to sort of be still any time of day, you will find more animals than you would have ever expected.
Great. Well, thank you so much to both of our panelists and to everyone who joined us tonight. It was so great to be here to learn about wetlands and the species that rely on this critical habitat. And thank you to everyone who is taking action to make sure that Illinois is going to actually protect wetlands and make sure that we have a healthy environment for ourselves, for our turtles, for our frogs, for our birds, and for all of our wildlife. Thanks so much for joining us. Again, my name's Emily. You can feel free to, if you have any additional questions, reach out to me at Environment Illinois, just info@environmentillinois.org. Have a great rest of your night.